Now, on Thursday, Deputy President DD Mabuza answered questions from members of parliament in the National Assembly. Opposition parties have been vocal in their unhappiness about SAA receiving a 10.5 billion rand bailout. SAA was placed under business rescue in December 2019, and a business rescue plan was finally approved after months of disagreements with stakeholders. Mabuza added that the consolidated expenditure over the next 3 years shows that there's been no negative decrease in education, health, community and social development funding. The organization Undoing Tax Abuse questioned the government's priorities, and Chief Executive Officer Wayne Duvenage joins us now to discuss this further. Wayne, thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining us on Weekend Dawn. Now, how sure can taxpayers be this time that the funds for the latest bailout will actually help the airline in bailing it out?
Well, we can never be sure. We can only go on the history, and that is quite a dismal picture. So already, we've done our financial projections. The 10.5 billion is not enough. The airline is going to have an operating loss for the next 3 years, well above what government indicates it's going to be. So we put the costs that government is still going to have to put into this airline above the 10.5 billion as another roughly 9 billion rand. And then you're still not sure. And the airline industry right now is in a dismal state. And this is the time for government to get out of the business of business, because it doesn't have a good track record. It doesn't know how to operate these complex and highly competitive industries properly. There is no, forthcoming of an equity partner that we can see and who is going to really invest in this airline. So we believe it's time to get out. It's not necessary, as David Mabuza puts it, that this country needs to have an airline. Many countries have let go of the airlines and allowed and enabled the industry to flourish through competitiveness and other airlines coming in and taking up the vacant seats. So we don't need the airline, as David Mabuza says.
Why is it that government is holding on to this airline so much and not looking at options like privatizing it?
Well, we don't know. I think it's like government holds on to so many things that it shouldn't. Whether it's a vanity project, whether it's really just stuck in the rut and a time warp of thinking that it has to own state-owned entities for some reason. We're not really sure, but for some reason, some in government are trying to hold on to it. Others aren't. I think Tito Mboweni, if he had his way, he would let it go. He would allow the competitive market forces to come into play. And what we need here is for government to understand that if it just enables a competitive industry, as it has done in the local airline industry, but from an international point of view and a regional point of view, we believe that that those seats and people will still be able to fly into and out of South Africa at much cheaper rates than SAA could provide.
Wayne, in your opinion, what does this 10.5 billion rand bailout actually mean in terms of affecting the pocket of the taxpayer, the consumer, you and I?
Well, it means that Home Affairs gets less. It means that the criminal justice system, which requires funding to capacitate itself to deal with corruption, they get less. And other areas of government. And that in this time, in this crisis that we find ourselves, where we are really short of funds, we don't need to waste it on an airline. So it's sad. We lose out. And it's not as if that money is going to was being allocated to other critical areas like education or water or health. It's not. It's actually going to an airline. Now, think about what that means. We understand that the airline has bigger spin-offs. It creates jobs. But you can create so many more jobs with that money. And jobs are taken up, by the way, when the private sector fills those seats. They also employ pilots and cabin crew and so forth. So we just think government has got its priorities wrong, and the people, especially the poorest of the poor, who really cannot, afford the money that is taken away from the critical areas of this country, they feel it the most.
I think then it would be fitting now to talk about what's been taking place at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. Dudu Myeni now might be facing some serious charges for disclosing the name of a secret witness. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, long overdue. I think Judge Zondo wasn't happy with her explanation. It's not as if she did it once, she did it a couple of times. She was told she should not be revealing Mr. X's details, and she went ahead and did so. This commission needs to be taken seriously. People's lives are at stake. And Dudu Myeni, who's just flouted the whole commission, really doesn't take it seriously now, needs to be put in her box, and she needs to. We're very pleased that the Zondo has taken the action that he has, but we believe it should go further than that. There's a lot of evidence that the evidence leaders have put to Dudu Myeni, and she refused to answer the questions. That's fine. That's her right. But the evidence there needs to go to the NPA, and more charges should be laid against transgressions of the Companies Act. Even though we've found a delinquent director, she now needs to face the music in the court of law for her conduct and be held accountable for those transgressions as well. But so we welcome Judge Zondo's decision to hold her to account on revealing the name of the witness.
You mentioned something quite important there about taking the commission quite seriously. Do you find that there are other witnesses at the commission who are not taking it seriously, just like the likes of Dudu Myeni?
Yes, certainly Jacob Zuma isn't. I think those who are steeped in allegations of corruption during the state capture era are doing as much as they can to stay out of that court. It is not a formal court, but that commission, because they are going to incriminate themselves if they answer the question. So we believe, if people really had the respect of citizens in this country and needed to answer questions of their conduct during state capture, they should be forthcoming and answering the questions. If they don't, we believe the commission is going to nonetheless put all its evidence forward. Recommendations will come from that, and those recommendations aren't going to be in their favor. And that evidence that has been led by the evidence leaders is going to find its way to the NPA, which now has been undercapacitated by losing more funds to try and bail out SA. This is the irony here. But we need those individuals to be hauled into court to answer the questions, where if they want to still remain silent, well, that's fine. A judge will then have to make a decision on one side of the facts, and they will face jail time if that's the case. So I think they're just digging a hole for themselves, quite frankly. They're not doing themselves any favors. They're being poorly advised.
And maybe we should talk about the commission and how much money has been spent there. Does that affect the taxpayer as well?
Well, of course, 900 million rand, where it's estimated it's going to be just under R1 billion. But in the greater scheme of the mega billions that have been lost to state capture, it's a minor amount. We need to get to the bottom of state capture. There were a lot of people, very senior people involved. So this is a very good process, albeit a bit slow and a bit costly. We don't believe the money is wasted. We believe that a lot of good will come from this going forward. And I think if the recommendations for certain things and legislation to change to be put in place, or processes that need to be changed so we do not find ourselves in another situation of state capture in the future, I think it's money well spent. It's minor in the greater scheme of things.
Wayne, before I do let you go, maybe it's worth just touching on SAA again. So what if this 10.5 billion rand is again squandered? Where would that leave the national carrier going forward? And again, how do we as taxpayers, or how do we as consumers approach government or approach SAA to tell them to maybe think about privatizing the airline?
Well, this is where we believe the consumer now needs to apply the pressure. And we believe, and we've called for a boycott of the airline. And a boycott means not just, oh, well, don't fly, because a lot of people tell us, well, they don't fly SA anyway because it's expensive, and it is. But there are a lot of businesses that fly SA. There are a lot of tour operators that use SAA. And what we need to do is expose them and then apply a consumer pressure on those companies and on those tour operators as well, to get them to stop using SA. And I think once government starts to realize that nobody's going to fly other than a few government officials and a few government departments and businesses that are aligned to government, well, then it will crash. So sometimes you have to take a harder stance. Consumers have to boycott the airline in order for government to finally sit up and realize that it's not going anywhere with this airline. The people will now speak through their voting with their feet and their spending power. and that way you collapse a government decision. If that's what it has to be, that's what it has to be. And this is not unpatriotic. This is about people sending a clear message to government. We're fed up with the decisions you make. You need to start becoming citizen-centric, and you need to start listening to the public instead of forging ahead with these bad decisions.
Wayne Duvenage, thank you for your time. That's the CEO of OUTA weighing in on the Deputy President's Q&A session in Parliament and the criminal complaint to be laid against Dudu Myeni.